All right, welcome to the Parenting Teen Summit interviews here. I'm Matt.
I'm Stephanie.
And we are with Kristen Welch today. She is an author of a great new book called Grateful Teen. Sorry, I knew I'd mess it up. Raising Grateful Teens in an Entitled World. It's a bit of a tongue twister, but we're going to get into with her today about raising grateful teens, being a bit vulnerable and how that can kind of tie in, and avoiding an entitlement mentality. She's also the founder of Mercy House, kind of a refuge for single mothers all around the world. And I'm sure she'll mention that a bit, but we're very excited to have her. Kristen, we have one big question for you to start things off. We're asking everybody this, and with your involvement, on a global scale with suffering and bringing hope to it, how do you see hope for the next generation?
Well, I think that I'm encouraged by the next generation. I think that in a lot of ways, we're way ahead of where we were even when I was a kid. I think this next generation is really asking for purpose, and they want what they do to matter, and they want to serve and give back. It might be a trend, but I love that we see on the news, people standing in line to serve in some places, and kids at their core have a good heart. And I think that there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of hope for the future.
That's awesome. I love hearing that. Kristen, you are a mom, right? How old are your kids?
I have a 17-year-old daughter, a 15-year-old son, and a 10-year-old daughter. So I'm
awesome.
3. And actually our family just started the foster process. So we'll see what happens there.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
So one of the things that you have written about, sharing stories from your own experience and also just advice for parents, or all this together in a lot of ways, but what would you say are some of the main ways you have found to combat entitlement and to kind of cultivate an attitude of gratefulness?
I think there are a lot of answers to this question. I don't necessarily think it's one specific answer, but in our home and in my parenting perspective has been a huge answer in combating entitlement, ongoing perspective, and providing that for our kids and even ourselves. No one has to teach our kids how to compare themselves to others. It happens, toddlers do it. They see a toy that someone else has and they want it. And that problem only, I think, increases the older kids get with technology and all of the changes and everything that's happening so quickly. We want what other people have. But what we do have to teach our kids is how to compare ourselves. We typically compare ourselves to people who have more. That's obvious, right? But I think when we can teach our kids how to compare themselves to people who have less, that gives them perspective. And what it does is it puts us in the middle. We're not the one lacking as much as we're the one that has something to be thankful for. And so providing ongoing perspective, it's challenging to come up with ways to do that. I've had people say to me, well, I can't, go on mission trips across the globe with my family. And I don't think, I think if we can do that, that's awesome. I love being able to travel with my kids when we can do that. But perspective is really something we can capture in our own neighborhood. And a few years ago, and I have been able to take my kids to some amazing places all across Africa and Europe through our nonprofit. But a few years ago, my teenagers had the opportunity to serve in a local missions trip in our city of Houston. And I remember my husband and I were talking about it over dinner because the kids had asked if they could go. And my off the cuff reaction was, I don't know if we have the money for that right now. And my husband was like, our teenagers are asking to go on a mission trip and serve in our city. The answer is yes to that. And so we figured it out in our budget and let our kids go on this little trip 2 hours from home. And I will never forget my daughter at the time. She was about 15. She texted me and she said, she had seen poverty in other countries, but she was so amazed that here in our own state, there were people who had so little. And she sent me a picture from her phone and she said, I am standing in a woman's house 2 hours from our home, and she does not have a floor. And you can see the dirt ground under the wooden floor had rotted all the way to the ground, and like grass was growing up through her kitchen floor. And so these kids were gutting it and they were learning how to put a floor down. And I remember thinking, I'm so glad that I sent my kids on this trip. But when they got home, they were dirty and exhausted. And my daughter laid on our kitchen floor and like hugged it. She was like, I never have thought to be thankful for a floor. And I thought it was so powerful because that's perspective. And when we can just show our kids how other people live, even if it's, how the elderly live or the struggle of single moms, anything that's a little different than our normal bubble, if we can get them out of what's comfortable and show them how the world lives, I think it is our biggest weapon in fighting entitlement.
Wow. That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that story. I would be curious, kind of, what would you say to a parent of a younger kid who's trying to kind of instill this at a young age, about just practical ways to do that and have that conversation, especially when kids are young and maybe it's difficult for them to process? And then also, what would you say to a parent of maybe a teenager who is kind of on the entitled side and maybe they're like, okay, I realize I need to do something about this. I want to instill perspective, but maybe they feel like it's too late. What would you say to both of those parents?
Well, I think with parenting young children, I have a big age gap between my oldest and youngest. It's 7 years. So I feel like sometimes I'm, got my parenting helmet on or hat on that's helping me with my teenagers. And then, we're still doing tooth fairy with my youngest child. And so it's given me good perspective knowing, the difference there. And with younger kids, I'll never forget when my youngest was in kindergarten. We love sponsoring children, and not necessarily through one organization, but partnering with people we believe in, researching and finding the best organizations out there where we can put the picture of a child on a refrigerator from somewhere that, our $20 a month pays for this or our $30 a month pays for that. So that's been something we've done since my kids were very little. And some of those kids we've sponsored for 10 and 15 years and they're graduating now. And my kids have kind of grown up with them. And there's so many options for a budget, where you can find from $10 all the way up to $300 sponsorships. And so we have a variety of different sponsorships. And when my youngest was in kindergarten, she brought home a friend. And we just take those pictures and they're on the side of our refrigerator. And so just as a constant reminder, when we open our refrigerator, that's that perspective, there's someone in our life that we love, but they have less than us. And so constantly looking for ways to get that in our faces, our kids' faces, and in our faces too, as adults. But my little girl was giving her new friend a tour of our home, and it was so cute. She was like, and this is the bathroom, and this is the living room. And she was walking her around the house, and I was following just, her conversation, just making sure. I didn't know what she was going to say. It was like her first play date of someone she didn't know very well. And so she gets to our refrigerator and she says, and these are the people that we help all around the world. And she said, what does your family do? Who do you help? And it was and it wasn't, there was no negative connotation. I mean, it was so innocent. And her friend, answered her question in her own way. But I think it's so powerful when we make service and giving to others a regular, normal part of our lives. We are raising kids that's their normal. They expect it. They're like, this is what we do as a family. What do you do? And it really impacted me as an adult. My youngest was 3 years old when we started our nonprofit. So she doesn't know anything different. I mean, this is all she knows. And there are probably some negative things about that. I always say all my kids are going to need counseling, when they're older. But I think there's some positives too, that, you know, our kids are growing up in the environment that we create for them. And if we create an environment of you can have whatever you want when you want it, just demand it, then those are the kind of kids we're going to produce. But if we can raise kids in this environment of looking for the needs around us, how do we meet? That's why we're here. Like, we live on this street for a reason. You know, it's not an accident. And so who can we help? Who can we take a meal to? Whose car can we wash? You know, and it doesn't have to be gigantic or big. And I think this whole raising world changers, you know, I want to raise kids who change the world, but that's allowing them to change one person's world. These small acts of kindness, you know, seeing the needs of others, that's what changes the world. And so I would say to parents who have maybe rebellious kids, or they're in a stubborn phase, or they feel like it's too late. I would say it's never too late. It's never too late for us as adults. And I think kids are entitled because we entitle them. And so really we have to start with ourselves. Parents have to look first at their heart. I think what was so humbling and hard about this journey with my family was realizing that I was part of the problem. As a parent, it was hard because I want my kids to have what everyone else has. I want them to fit in. I want them to feel maybe okay about some of the things that I struggled with as a kid. And, you know, I think that's all normal, and that doesn't mean we're bad parents. But that does mean that sometimes in our effort to provide these things for our kids, maybe we've given them too much too soon, and it's okay to say no. So I think starting with ourselves, looking, how can I affect change? And then being brave and courageous. Parenting takes bravery, you know? Sometimes we have to say no, and then we get to say yes.
And it's a bit brave to say, hey, the problem is starting with me as the parent too. And that's wise.
Yeah.
How can a parent combat that, do you think? Just from your experience and from what you've found, how can the parent see that within themselves and kind of fight it within themselves, and then fight the urge to give their kids, you know, the world?
Mm-hmm.
It seems like there's kind of an inborn struggle between like raising a child that can change the world and giving them those messages over and over again, but then not giving them everything.
Right.
At the same
Well,
time.
and in our culture, you know, from the minute we're handed this bundle of blue and pink, we are meeting every need that they have, right? I mean, that's our job. At some point, that transitions into discipline and authority, and getting them on this path, this right path. And it's generally going to go against their will because we're raising sinners. You know, we're raising humans with flesh. And so there's going to be this combative, difficult seasons, you know, that we have with our kids. I think our culture is telling us, if you love your kids, you will give them the world. You will give them the world. And that's, you know, the full gamut. And that, I guess it varies depending on families, what your kids want, but a lot of kids want the same thing, right? They want what other people have, or they want what's popular, trendy, or current. And I was in that boat. So I'm talking from experience, not from a platform. I was that parent. I wanted my kids to have everything that I didn't have. And I thought that was how I showed them that I loved them. But then I realized they just expected things that I couldn't give them. And I felt guilty about it. And I got very wrapped up in, you know, trying to feed this monster that I had created. And I think I've learned through the process, the hard way, the long way, that giving our kids the world has nothing to do with stuff. It has nothing to do with stuff. It's giving them a world view. And I think when we can raise kids who care about other people, we're raising world changers. Just compassionate people who truly love. These are the heroes in our society. These are the great bosses. These are the successful businessmen. They can empathize and they're compassionate. And that's what we want. I did this survey where I had like 5,000 parents respond to questions. And when I asked, what do you want most for your child? The number one thing that people said is, I want them to be happy and successful. Mm-hmm. I'm not opposed to happy and successful kids at all. I think that's a great answer. I think that we have to just define happy and successful. If we want to have happy kids all the time, then we're back into that entitlement issue, because kids typically are happy when they're getting what they want. But if we want to raise truly successful adults, we're preparing them for life and for the future. And they're going to have employers one day, and they're going to have professors that mom can't fix the problem. And we want them to contribute to society and not live in our basement until they're 50 years old. And, we want to raise successful adults. And I think that giving them a worldview is huge. And a few months ago, I was in Kenya with my family, and we were sitting in the home of a woman that we work with and provide a job for. And that's one of the main things we do at Mercy House, is we provide jobs in a biblical setting for women in 25 countries, so that these women who are oppressed and impoverished can feed their kids. If you ask a woman in poverty what she wants, she's going to say a job. They don't want us to feed their kids. And when we can do that, we provide dignity. And so I'm sitting in this situation with my family. My 10-year-old is there, everyone's there. And we have bed bugs crawling all over us. And it was a very abnormal day for us. It was hard. And we could hear rats scurrying around us. And this woman lives her family before a job on less than $1 a day. And I remember thinking to myself, and I'm being vulnerable here, honest. I thought to myself, I just want to go home. There was some family dispute in the house. And so all of a sudden I realized I kind of had my kids in maybe not a safe situation. And I just really wanted to get out of there. And I kept thinking, I want my normal. And the minute I thought those words, I had another thought. This is her normal. This is actually the normal of 75% of the world. And I think if we can give our kids this huge key, they will unlock this wisdom and know that our normal and what we complain about and what we're having a hard time with, it doesn't mean it's not important, but it's privileged in so many ways. And the world's normal, where 3/4 of the people don't have access to clean water or things we take for granted, when we can just show our kids that in some way, some sort of worldview, it shifts things for us. And so instead of feeling sorry for my kids, we got back to the car and shook out our clothes and talked about it. And their response was so epic. It was, they weren't sad or scared. They had compassion, and it changed the way that they saw the world and the way they even understand normal. And so getting our family out of our comfort zone it's huge. It is one of the best things we can do. And we don't have to go overseas to do that. We can go next door. But doing something a little uncomfortable, that's a little risky, that feels a little out of the box with our family, these are assets. These are our tools and resources that we can pull from, and we can say, remember when we did that? Remember when we visited there? Remember how you felt? And then we have this teachable moment. And so looking for those opportunities it's huge.
That's awesome. I'm curious, Kristen, to hear your thoughts on kind of the role of vulnerability in that, you know, when you're doing those things that are outside your comfort zone with your kids. How much do you share as a parent? How vulnerable are you with your kids? And kind of what role does that play in the process of gaining perspective?
Well, I think anyone who's ever read anything I've written, they know I talk about my messes a lot, my laundry room and physical messes. I'm a neat freak, but I have a messy life. And I think if you're parenting kids, your life is messy in some way. It's not always tidy. And that's not just the kitchen sink, it's um, emotions and phases and challenges that our kids go through. And I think it's really powerful when we can be vulnerable with our kids. Um, there are things that I've gone through that I've shared with my kids. There are challenges my husband has faced, and he pulls my son aside and they have time together every single day. He sets an alarm on his phone, and every night around 8:30, the alarm goes off and he checks in with our son about challenges as a teen boy that he's facing, so that he knows how to help him battle what he's going through. And the only reason that works is because my husband has shared his battle wounds with our son. He's identified, he has said, what you're feeling and what you're experiencing, it's normal. You're normal. And I think our kids need to hear that. My teen daughter needs to know that standing in front of the mirror and trying to decide what to wear and having a total, pity party or meltdown or love-hate relationship with that reflection, that is normal. That most women, I don't even know the percentage, the majority of women at some point, they have that same conversation with themselves. And so letting our kids in and defining what's normal, I think it's huge. As a mother, some of the most powerful words that women have said to me is, it's normal. When I go to them and I'm like, I don't know what to do in this situation, and I'll explain, the drama or the school challenge or whatever it is, and they have stopped and they've said, hey, hang on, this is normal. And I'm like having this huge sigh of relief. Oh, okay. That doesn't mean it's easy, and that doesn't mean that it's going to go away tomorrow. But that person saying that is being vulnerable and saying, what you're going through, I've been through that too. And I think when we can do that with our kids, I mean, these are our children. In moments where it gets heated, and I think as kids get older, we've always allowed our kids to sort of share what their beef is. We actually used to have a night called What's Your Beef? Once a month.
I love that.
What an idea.
We would let our kids air whatever, like, what is bothering you? Painful night, honestly, because our kids were honest.
Mm-hmm.
And they would sort of give us a grade, like, I love this about how you're parenting me, but when you get angry because my room is a mess, the last thing I want to do is clean it. But that one time that you stopped everything and you helped me clean my room, that meant so much to me. And so when we can, have this relationship with our kids where we can talk these things through, it's huge. It's a good way to handle challenges and strife and disagreements that are going to happen.
That's amazing. I'm not a parent, but I can imagine just feeling the burning desire for feedback almost of like, how am I really doing with these kids, with these teens?
Right.
And if you've built up to that point of vulnerability and honesty kind of back and forth, then when they give you that feedback, and that just sounds incredibly comforting.
It is. It's a double-edged sword.
Well, yeah. Painful and maybe comforting.
Sitting in front of your boss and getting a job review is sort of how it feels. But I think one of the most beautiful things we can do as parents is, and this is going along with vulnerability and really engaging with our kids, especially if they're struggling, which every other day, it's like I'll say, wow, our kids are all in a good place and we've overcome this or that. And then the next day it's something totally new, because that's parenting. You just never know what is around the corner. But I think listening is probably our greatest asset that we don't use.
Mm-hmm.
I know that, and it's not just listening, it's saying something to them or having them say something back to you and then waiting. I think parents, at least in my house, I like to fill the silence, and I'm a talker and I have a lot to say. So if my kids ask me a question or I ask them a question I don't like the answer, I just fill in all those what should be silent. And actually, I went to counseling with one of my kids for a certain season because we were just not communicating well. And it was amazing. I highly recommend counseling of all kinds. I love it. I think if we're not willing to get as many resources and tools as we can, then maybe that's pride, or I don't know. I think if you have access to it, take advantage of it. And this counselor just gave us communication tools, like literally, and a lot of people may know this already, but I didn't. And what I discovered is that if I would just be quiet, my kids will open up and talk to me. Mm-hmm. And so I try to practice this, like wait 30 seconds or wait a minute and not say anything. And especially if I'm having a child that's really struggling, like I know they're acting out and they need attention, or they're in a terrible mood and I don't know why, I try to get in their world. So my teen daughter loves coffee. She just, loves trying different kinds of coffee. So that's an easy, let's go grab a cup of coffee. My son loves anything outdoors. So let's go walk the dog together. Those kind of things. It doesn't have to cost money. It doesn't have to be a weekend trip, but getting them alone and getting into their worlds, doing something that they enjoy, they let their guard down, and asking them, and then waiting and see what they say. I think that works. And our kids want to be heard, and especially teenagers. It's funny. I used to think when I had toddlers that I was sleep deprived. And then I had teenagers. And parents who have like babies and teenagers, God bless them, because they never sleep. But like 10:30 at night, typically there's a teenager, laying in bed. And in my bed, I'll walk in, from the shower or whatever, and I'm like, what are you doing here? And they want to talk. And, when your kids want to talk, you need to stop what you're doing and listen, because you don't get that free pass all the time. When they want to talk, you need to listen. And my kids like to do that usually late at night because they're night owls and they're teenagers. Midnight is early for them. And so, and then they get up early for school. But when they want to talk, it's good to listen. Sometimes they'll say things, and if you just wait and not try to fix it, they will open up that can of what needs to come out, and they'll just talk and talk and talk, and they don't need you to fix it. They just need to be heard. And this is something that I'm still learning, but it's really been good. When you're vulnerable with your kids, really what you're experiencing is intimacy. You're getting into their heart and their head, and you're finding out things that they're not telling people. Maybe you're seeing the symptoms of whatever it is they're struggling with, but you're getting to the root of it, and you know how to pray for them and how to parent them better.
Well, Kristen, we're getting to the end of our time here, and we've gone over some huge topics. I mean, gratitude, perspective, and vulnerability, all within families. Do you have any resources that you'd like to point us to if somebody says, hey, like that's my family, I need more of that gratitude, I need more of that back and forth, the vulnerability, anything you'd like to direct us to here?
Well, I wrote a book called Raising Grateful Kids in an Entitled World, so that might be a good place to start. It's not a typical parenting book where, there's a professional sitting behind the desk. It's me being very vulnerable and inviting you into the mess of my life and learning some of the lessons that I've learned. there's a book that really helped our family, and I feel like it's age appropriate for school age kids, so maybe kindergarten and up. It's called Running for My Life by Lopez Lemong, and it's my favorite book in the world besides the Bible. And it's a book that we read to our kids, and it's written on maybe a second or third grade level. And it's about a lost boy from Sudan, and it's his story about how he escaped a very difficult life and actually became an Olympic athlete in the USA, currently a professional runner. But it is the kind of perspective, it's a good introduction to perspective that I think is a great resource. I think you can find a lot of resources through Mercy House Global, the nonprofit that we run. We actually have these perspective kits for kids that you can purchase. They're like $20, and it comes with family night cards that feature a different country. A woman in poverty made a ball that comes in every kit, so it's games you can play with your kids. And even with your teens, like throw this ball as far as you can, now fill a bucket full of water, and that's how far an average woman in poverty walks for clean water every day. So your teenagers are like, I can throw this ball really far, and then they realize they have to carry water. So that's fun. But there's recipes, and it's ideas that really stir perspective in your family. So those are just some small things.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kristen. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground here. So thanks again for being with us and offering all this wisdom.
All right. Thank you.
We'll say goodbye.
All right.